Then, of course, we have the statement that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and of course most people, including me, actually believe that. We thought he probably did, following the Gulf War. We now know that he had none. We then are told that this is about removing Saddam Hussein because he was an evil, monstrous, sadistic dictator, which he was. But I'm afraid there are quite a number of those around the world. And why pick on Saddam Hussein and not others, many of them in Africa, for example, some in Asia, and why pick on him in 2001 when he came to power in 1979? So I think all of these are convenient excuses, convenient pretexts for something which was planned for a very different purpose. Yes, it is utterly ruthless, but that is the way some governments are. You have to ask the question, of course we in the UK are asking this question, I've asked it exhaustively in the last 2-3 years. Why is it that the UK participated in the war in Iraq? And I think the answer is that the US planned the war, as I believe, for very different purposes, because it was part of their plan for world domination. And President Bush, at a very early stage, asked Tony Blair to give support to the Americans. It is said that he asked this first time at a dinner in the White House 10 days after 9/11. And Tony Blair replied, in my view quite properly, that the first objective must be to go after Al-Qaeda and Taliban, because they almost certainly were the perpetrators of 9/11. And President Bush significantly, and the evidence of this is Christopher Meyer, who was the UK ambassador to the US. According to Meyer, President Bush said, "Yes, I agree with you, Tony, but when we've done that, we must return to Iraq." So I think, again, the Americans were very clear about their objective. That was not the British objective at that time, but later, and in particular, I believe, the evidence shows that at the meeting between Blair and Bush at the Crawford Ranch in Texas, belonging to President Bush, Bush again specifically and no doubt persistently asked Blair if Britain would give support for the attack on Iraq, probably on the grounds of weapons of mass destruction. I don't know. I don't think we've been told. And I believe, although of course he has denied this, I believe that Blair at that point indicated that Britain would be prepared to do so. Of course, Blair continued right up to the Iraq War to say that no decision had been taken. I think most people, including me, believe that that is a very selective use of language, and that a commitment had been given which was very strong and which Tony Blair was determined to carry through. After all, we never had a debate at an early stage when we could in Parliament have taken a different view. We never had a debate until the day before war started. There was, I think, virtually hardly any discussion in Cabinet or in Parliament, and this is something that Tony Blair had given a personal commitment to President Bush. That's what I believe happened.
Back to the attacks of 9/11. After the attacks happened, there was an investigation, the 9/11 Commission. They wrote a very thorough report. What do you think of it? This is an explanation.
It was a 580-page avoidance of any serious explanation. If you look at it, and of course I have, only the first chapter goes into looking at what actually happened at 9/11 and leading up to it. All the rest, which is far and away the great majority of the report, is not actually about 9/11 as such at all, but it is about the kind of alternative arrangements or preparations that America needs to make in future to avoid it happening again. Of course, that is an important issue, and I would expect them to discuss it. But in terms of actually answering central questions, the one that I've been posing, none of them are answered. It doesn't answer the question, why were all the leads beforehand not followed up? It doesn't answer the question why on the day were no airplanes, though there was an F-16 squadron 10 miles away from Washington, none of them was put into the air in an hour and 40 minutes. I would have expected them to be put in the air within 1 or 2 minutes. Why, for an hour and 40 minutes, did this not happen is extraordinary and almost unbelievable. And thirdly, afterwards, why was such little effort made to find bin Laden or Taliban or Al-Qaeda leaders? None of those questions are convincingly answered in the report at all. And indeed, there is one statement it makes which I think sums up the whole report. It is widely known and believed that Lieutenant Mahmoud Ahmed, who was the head of Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI, asked a known Islamic militant called Omar Saeed Sheikh to wire $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, the leading hijacker, in the period leading up to 9/11. That has since been confirmed by the FBI. What the report, the official investigatory report, says is that the US has never been able to find the sources of financing for 9/11. And then they say this, which is a statement of, I think, breathtaking disingenuousness. That, after all, is a matter of no great importance. I find that astonishing. It is a matter of absolutely central importance. We in London, after the London bombings, are very keen to find out all the background leads, who funded it, who were the masterminds. There was no attempt to find that out. And the links with Pakistan, I mean, the links between the Pakistani ISI and the American CIA have always been very close. I don't know exactly what those links were. Nobody does. But I would have expected them to be investigated thoroughly and all the documentary evidence to be put on the table so that everyone knows. I mean, not least of all, the widows of the 3,000 people who were murdered in this unbelievable outrage on 9/11. They want to know the truth. They have set down, I think it's 25, 30 questions, detailed, precise questions, which have never been answered, which were not answered by the official report. And they are still demanding action. They're considering taking a class action against the government and the US authorities. So the report was what we would simply call, I have to say, a whitewash. I am always against conspiracy theory. It's always very easy to assume that there's a conspiracy and that's what lies behind it, and some of them are wild and wacky. The truth is, conspiracies do sometimes occur. In history, there's no doubt about that. But I think our immediate assumption must be it's cock-up, there was panic, there was failure, human beings are always fallible, we made a terrible mess of it. I simply ask those who look at the evidence which I've spelt out in great detail, very specific, provided documentary backup from material which is all in the public domain and which everyone has access to. I do not have access to any material that is not available to any inquiring member of the public. When you look at that evidence, it is so compelling, so comprehensive, that it is very difficult, in my view, to come to a different conclusion from the one that I do, that this is not about a war on terror. It is about providing a very convenient trigger, a pretext, a cover for what they intended to do for completely different reasons. And I just quote one evidence in source. That is a very important one. John Loftus is a former US federal prosecutor and terrorism expert. And he said, shortly after 9/11, that the evidence provided by other countries, the intelligence data provided to the United States authorities, was so extensive and so detailed, those are his words, that it is impossible for the FBI or the CIA to mount a plea of incompetence.